talking about the future of social media, kind of more, but starting to segue into just like what it means to try and predict the future. Ooh. Starting in three, two, one, zero. So I was talking about social media, obviously. That's all I'm doing. And taking some decent shots. Look at me. And there I was, thinking about all this stuff, and it occurred to me that one of the most important things that I've left out so far is what I actually think is going to occur in the future. And I think, again, it's sort of an extent of what we've seen already. It's a real homogenization of apps. Like, apps seem to be becoming like more and more similar across all these different platforms. It used to be if you were on a different product, you had a very different interface. Now it seems to be that the interfaces on the actual products are coming together way closer and closer. But how people interface, whether they're using a phone, whether they're using all these crazy headsets and artificial reality things, whatever sort of interaction they're using, whether they're using a watch, right? Watches are crazy and new. However they're doing this, I think one of the interesting things about the people who are doing this is they don't find it that weird that there's a whole bunch of different ways of interacting with the same thing in a very similar sort of way. It's more, becomes more about preferences, like what platform do I wish to use to interact with people in a particular way? Am I somebody who really wants to be in the experience and surrounded by it, or am I somebody who just wants to sit back and enjoy a visual, or do I much rather prefer just having audio? Do I just like having audio? Is audio the sort of thing that I like? And this sort of choice in sort of how I interact with what's ultimately a piece of content that can be delivered in the same sort of way on each platform is very interesting to me. So I think that would be my general sort of prediction. I'm finding the adoption of watches really fascinating to see, and their flexibility and what they can be used for. And I always thought, especially as you see phones get bigger and everything's making things larger, I imagine we're going to see watches get bigger, and that's going to get ridiculous and large as well. But at the same time, it's just fascinating to see people getting excited about something that is kind of just like it on your wrist. It seems to make an actual difference. Seeing people use it and seeing people use basically the same sort of apps, there are times where it's actually functional. I obviously don't have one, but I've known multiple people who have them, people who swear by them, people who love them, and I've seen people use them all the time. And at this point, I'm understanding that, for me, who uses a watch as well, I'm not actually wearing one right now, but really wants it to just tell me the time and not a whole lot else. Like, I really don't want notifications on there. I'm trying to stay away from all sorts of tracking and things, not because I'm worried about it tracking me, but much more just because it's just an extra set of complications on my life right now that I'm not feeling like I need. Maybe at a certain point I'll get it, but seeing the way people can interact with it calmly, just always having that thing there, things like the noise decibel alerts that had never occurred to me would actually be that useful. I'm finding really enjoyable. It's kind of cool, like just being around people who have them, who know that sort of thing is happening. It's much less invasive than I had expected. It really. One of the things, of course, one of the first things that people thought was going to happen with wearable tech was that we would start with eyeglasses, and that eyeglasses would be great. And I think there's still real potential for eyeglasses to work in the future as the tech gets better. But the real problem with all the early prototypes was they looked rough. Glasses are not the most attractive piece of of clothing to start with. Ooh, rough. And taking that a piece of not particularly enticing clothing and trying to add technology to it, which has always had a bit of a coolness problem, and then having people wear it around, like, you get a lot of people stopping you and going, what is that? And not in the sort of way that people who wear interesting things usually want. You got to be careful with how you produce a product that you want people to actually use. There has to be some level of like, this doesn't make me seem like a total geek. It's actually useful. That's why it's something that Nintendo, I think, really nailed with. Get him. Thank you. With the Switch, it's got this. It is kind of weird and new looking, but it's it's got this like familiar design language to us. You know, people have been playing with PSPs and things for years. They've been playing with all sorts of different handhelds, Game Boys, obviously, for ages and ages. So the idea that the Switch fits into this thing, yet also does stuff new, yet also can be plugged in, you know, that's a good balance. You know, I think with the Wii U, they really tried it, but they ended up with something that was just a little too cumbersome, a little too ugly, and then the Switch kind of, you know, really just improved across the board on it, at least in terms of the design language that I'm familiar with. So that's more talk about sort of all these different ways with which we can interact. I'm finding the homogenizing of these different things. You know, I do have a game system now. The fact that it can interact with this stuff in much the same way as my computers can, it just seems good. You know, there's a real sort of equal opportunity for apps that seems to be happening. And on the one hand, I know that there's a real challenge for developers because all of a sudden, as opposed to developing for one interface, they have to develop for like 7. And that's ridiculous in all sorts of ways. But for consumers, you know, it's hard because there is this battle between what's best for a consumer and what's best for the people who actually have to produce the software. And for consumers, it's really fun to have this big range of variety, to have all these different things that you can use the same sort of products on, and to experience things that you enjoy in different sort of surroundings, to experience things that you enjoy with a different interface. You know, especially for things like my wrists as I get older and they get more crinkly, and I still want to play games and yet also use my hands for art and all sorts of other interesting stuff, and for writing, and, you know, just whatever it happens to be, for lifting weights. You know, all of these things put real pressure through joints and through your muscles, and I do all sorts of spinnies and flippies in order to try and keep them in as good a health as possible. But you really do benefit from using interfaces that are more ergonomic, and that really helps. You know, all of a sudden I'm paying attention to these things and trying to choose specifically games and interfaces that I can use that aren't going to blow up my hands, and use them in the exact same way as I'm already doing for other things. You know, that's one of the challenges with playing games on the computer, is obviously it uses a keyboard, it uses this familiar and useful interface that I love, but also one that uses the same set of motions that I need for so many other things that I do on a regular basis. Oh, am I gonna get him? Oh, no. Absolutely right. Yeah. So I think where I want to segue with all of this social media stuff is to start talking more generally about the ideas that I think are interesting, and about the guy that's beside me. And then oh, no, yep. Get him? No, yeah, sad. Talking more generally, you're bad. Don't shake your head at that. Talking more generally about what I find interesting in terms of how I feel the future is going to develop, and how, you know, why everybody's interested in predicting the future, into what's going to occur, into what's going to happen, and what's the sort of process that I use to come to some of the conclusions that I have. Well, obviously, the simplest thing is when you're trying to predict the future, you want to be as conservative as possible, right? You don't want to make like grand claims unless you have really, really good sort of evidence for why they would be. I'm trying to stop the flag runner. But at the same time, if you're very conservative, then you risk never actually saying anything of interest or at all, or trying to push the buck in any sort of way. So I think one of the basic things that I start with is trying to understand sort of a wide or a range of things that are sort of peripheral to my topic, but not essential to it, right? So if you're trying to understand something like AI, it's good to have a good grasp on AI, but a lot of people take it too dedicated and they burrow in too deep on that. Oh. I'll catch you next time.